From the heartland of America and the gateway to the West, good morning, good evening, wherever you may be across the nation, around the world. I'm George Norrie. This is Coast to Coast AM. Later tonight, Past Lives. Here's what's happening. Hamas has launched a massive rocket barrage, injuring at least 5 Israelis. The Israelis were wounded in separate incidents in 5 cities, including Tel Aviv, while the barrage sent more than 1 million people running for cover. All of the wounded were said to be slightly injured. Former Trump campaign lawyer Jenna Ellis has pleaded guilty in the Georgia election subversion case and will cooperate with Fulton County prosecutors. It's the 3rd guilty plea in the past week. She was sentenced to 5 years probation, ordered to pay $5,000 in restitution. Dr. John Curtis, onlinecolumnist.com, was with us. John, they're falling all around the former president, aren't they?
Well, I think so, George. But remember that plea deals are somebody saving their own rear end, basically, trying to avoid prison or what have you, or losing their law licenses for the rest of their lives. So the motivation to rat Trump out right now is really pretty sickening when you think about it. I mean, it is true that Kenneth Chesebro and Sidney Powell and even tonight, there's a report that Mark Meadows, his former chief of staff, has now taken a plea deal, not a plea deal, but immunity deal, actually, with the special counsel, Jack Smith. Now, what are they trying to get to with Trump and all these plea deals? What do they want people to testify to? They want them to testify that Trump knew all along that he lost the election and that he deceived the public. That's what they're trying to get at. They're never going to be able to establish that. I mean, anybody that's been around Trump and listens to him knows that he may be delusional about this stuff. I mean, that internally he really believes that he won this election. Now, the cases, the reason why people continue to follow him, it blows people's minds that he's leading by 40 to 50% in the polls. Why? People think because the media has prosecuted him, the court of public opinion, this, on all the drive-by radios and TV stations, and they've convicted him of all of these alleged crimes. Well, the public doesn't buy it. Trump's followers believe that he's been framed, that he's been charged unfairly, persecuted, a witch hunt by the government. So it really doesn't matter what these people say, to the Jack Smith and the others, or even Fannie Willis, for instance, in Fulton County. So they have some people that are pleading, crocodile tears right now, whimpering in front of a judge saying, well, I didn't mean it, to suggest that there was election fraud. All of these things are worthless when it comes to Trump's lawyers in any court, whether it's the classified documents case at Mar-a-Lago, whether it's the January 6th case, whether it's any of these cases, the case in Fulton County, when he says that show me the evidence that the U.S. government in prosecuting me for years for being a Russian agent. Tell me how the Justice Department and FBI have changed, how you have changed, Mr. Smith, through all this. So I think, yes, these plea deals make for great TV, but I don't think they amount to a hill of beans in a court of law.
With all these cases against the former president, do you think anything's going to stick?
I think that the only thing that I think where he could get they could get some traction against him is maybe on the classified documents. But even there, I think, George, people ask themselves, a bunch of worthless old classified documents that the special counsel has gone on a limb and said that they violate the Espionage Act and they're a threat to U.S. national security. George, I don't think people buy it.
We will find out, John Curtis. We will find out. Just keep posting on your website, onlinecolumnist.com. An off-duty pilot facing 83 attempted murder charges after he apparently tried to shut off the engines of a plane mid-flight on Sunday night has admitted to taking psychedelic mushrooms. The 44-year-old man was riding in the cockpit of the plane as an authorized occupant when he unsuccessfully attempted to disrupt the operation of the engines. My gosh. Dozens of states suing Instagram and Facebook, parent company Meta, accusing the social media giant of harming young users' mental health through addictive features such as infinite news feeds and frequent notifications that demand users' constant attention. In the federal lawsuit filed in California by 33 attorneys general, the state alleged that the Meta's products have harmed minors and contributed to a mental health crisis in the United States. Catherine Austin Fitz is with us here. Catherine, I'm not sure a lawsuit like that's going to be able to stick. What do you think?
So whether or not the lawsuit can win or not is not clear, George. What is very clear is what the AGs can pull out on discovery could be phenomenally destructive to these companies. There is technology being used in social media and telecommunications, which is extreme. I mean, it shouldn't be legal. And so what I'm very interested in is to see what the attorney generals can pull out on discovery. And then I think, once you see the discovery, then you go from there. So I just think we have to wait and see what case they can make in court and then what they can pull out in discovery.
Are they screwing up the minds of young people?
I believe so. But again, what can you prove in a court of law? That has to be determined. But I, for one, am very glad to see the attorney generals do this. I'll never forget. There's a remarkable book on some of the technologies that have been developed to be applied to create gambling addictions. And when you realize what can be done with this technology, it's phenomenal. And among other things, it should be illegal. But if not, it should be fully disclosed. And I doubt that many of these companies have fully disclosed what they're really doing.
Thank you, Catherine. Catherine's website linked up on our Twitter feeds. It's called X at coasttocoastam.com. Regularly drinking tea or coffee during middle age could help people ward off frailty later in life, according to a new study. The research conducted by a team at the National University of Singapore involved over 12,000 participants between the ages of 45 and 74, spanning 2 decades. The key to these potential benefits, they suggest, is caffeine. Those who consume 4 cups of coffee daily experience the most significant benefits, but consistent drinkers of black and green tea also saw advantages. The world is on an unstoppable shift towards renewable energy, but the phase down of fossil fuels is not happening quickly enough, according to a new report. The International Energy Agency, the global energy watchdog, predicted renewables would provide half of the world's electricity by 2030. Up next, Glenn Rhodes back with us. We're going to talk about protecting our power grid and some other issues next on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast to Coast. George Norrie with you. Glenn Rhodes back with us. Spent 38 years at Martin Marietta, Lockheed Martin, Home Depot, Best Buy, Jefferson County Government, and the EMP Task Force on National and Homeland Security in various positions on projects including the instrumentation and flight safety system programs, the Small Intercontinental Ballistic Missile Program, the Peacekeeper Missile Program, and various interplanetary space lab and operations, both at Martin Marietta and later at Lockheed Martin. In 2014, he joined the late Dr. Peter Pry's EMP Task Force on National and Homeland Security and serves as the Director of National Operations. Glenn, welcome back. How have you been?
I've been just great, George, and I'm always a fan of Coast to Coast. You guys provide such a great service to the nation.
I miss Dr. Pry, don't you?
Oh, yes, for sure. I did catch you and William Fortune talk about the passing of our good friend Dr. Peter Pry. It's an incredible loss. The country lost a patriot, but more important, a bulldog in the China closet to try to get everybody awakened to these new existential threats.
Absolutely. Have you been able to carry the torch, Glenn?
Well, we have. The task force continues with the organization that he founded, and our work's even more pressing with a continued, and increased turmoil in the world, and the use of weapons, as we saw in Ukraine and the Soviet and Russia, geared on destroying critical infrastructure. So it's an important theme that we're trying to press.
Dr. Pry, of course, was a prolific writer, and you folks have picked up that as well.
Yeah, for sure. And George, let me just say that I think the theme for tonight's program, if we could just put it down to a few words, would be protection equals deterrence. And you'll see why later on in the program. But I was wondering if I could just take a few minutes and explain for those new listeners that don't understand what we're talking about. I could give a brief overview, if you mind, to what we're talking about.
You saved me a question. Go ahead.
Well, let's start with a range of man-made dangers that threaten our infrastructure. And, of course, these include kinetic threats such as the electric substation attacks that have been over a few years, including what's thought to be one of the more significant attacks in our history, right around the Boston Marathon time, when automatic weapons were used at the Metcalf substation, and we'll talk about that a little bit in California later on. And then there's also cyber attacks, which represent intrusions into computer-related equipment to alter their intended operations. And these lead to a whole area of vulnerabilities that incredibly, George, are not even talked about between information technology and operational technology folks. There is a huge gap, and you could spend like 3 hours just talking about the operational side. I'm not talking about the cyber threats. I'm talking about things that come into to threaten operations and continuity of operations through sensors that are hacked and SCADA devices, those are supervisory and data control devices that permeate all throughout the grid. And then there's the electromagnetic attacks, obviously, which we're going to talk about a little bit more, which can destroy most equipment that is electrical in nature. And this equipment is what the electrical grid depends on and represents a wide area of concern that could last and bring down the grid for months. An EMP of this magnitude would probably only be used in current technology from an explosion of a nuclear device in the upper atmosphere. But then there's non-nuclear EMP, and Peter was especially concerned about that.
Yep.
These are little devices that create and emanate or emit a radio-directed energy flash potentially composed of hundreds of kilovolts of radio energy over a specific and smaller area. But they're just as lethal to electronic gears. And yes, there are a number of ways that you could formulate and create these things that are non-nuclear. For example, there's flux capacitors. There's a system called a Marx generator, which was first described by Erwin Otto Marx in 1924. And its purpose is to develop and generate high voltages pulses from low voltage DC supply. And Marx generators are used for high energy physics experiments as well as to stimulate or simulate effects of lightning on power line gear and aviation equipment and a bunch of other things. But publicly, I can only surmise that someone has probably exposed some human guinea pig to a directed energy radio wave in the past with the field strength that we talk about and we know about, and I have absolutely no idea what a wave this high or higher would do to a human heart, because you know that ATP electrical cell processes are needed to function, but the results are probably lurking in some file in some underground warehouse in a desert in a more secure place with secret clearances to boot, because the fact is that we have not had a real prolific testing of how these directed energy waves would affect the human heart and our physiology. And then finally, there's the non-malevolent accidents and accidental actions that could cause harm if communications are disrupted between what are called independent systems operators. They're called ISOs. And if you could explain an ISO, they're similar to like an orchestra conductor using to guide a symphony together with utilities. So in a sense, this symphony is being played out minute by minute, hour by hour, with phasing, frequencies, and voltages. And if the conductor is eliminated, i.e., through the loss of communications, it could cause a ripple effect over a larger geographical area and take down the grid with all the music, when all the music would stop, both figuratively and literally. So we know that we have some concerns because there are several countries that could produce EMP weapons and weapon devices, and they include, obviously, Russia, North Korea, India, Israel, China, Pakistan, France, and the UK. And so those are some of the things that could affect, the grid from man-made sources. But then we have to travel over to space weather. And as you know, and you've had many guests on, these include, but are not limited to, geomagnetic disturbances brought on by solar winds, deep gamma radiation, and then closer to us, solar particle radiation from storms that include solar flares in the form of protons and electrons. And, of course, the biggest is a coronal mass ejection, which we've talked about before, which are the largest and most dangerous space storms and can cause a displacement or movement in the magnetosphere that can cause millions of miles of inducted currents on global electrical grids across the Earth and potentially destroy them. And, of course, the biggest one in recorded history was the Carrington event.
Right. But we've been lucky, Glenn, that some of them have gone off the side of the sun. Had they been facing us directly, we could have had some problems.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And we don't have enough of the solar history. We've only observed the sun in the last 200 years. So, we try to figure out how we can get a more defined view of what the sun is doing. But fortunately, some really smart people in Japan studied about 10,000 solar systems that were of the similar size as ours, and they started using proxy data to understand how often these solar storms, coronal mass ejections happen. So you don't increase your observable because it's not possible, the stuff that we see in the last 200 years. But if you can increase your data field to include proxy data from 10,000 stars, then they were able to see that we have about a 12% chance per decade to get hit by one of these things. And I think it's going to be even more often than that because, as you know, we're in the middle of solar cycle 25, and we haven't even reached the peak yet, for solar cycle 25 until next year. So we have a good chance of seeing massive aurora borealises and the southern effects too, way into lower latitudes of the planet. So just hold on to your seat and get prepared, right?
Absolutely. You've got a couple new books out. Does that include the free downloadable?
Yes. Of course, I want to tell people for the sake of record, to grab a piece of paper and pencil, and I'm going to write down some critical information that I think would be helpful in possibly, helping them understand what the problems are and also maybe saving some lives. So we at the task force are extremely busy as we continue to, educate the public and first responders and public officials from various, media outlets on the vulnerability of the power grid. And we still don't shy away, obviously, from explaining the two biggest gorillas in the room, the CMEs and the EMPs. But we continue to, and we also continue to recruit state directors. And if people are interested, they can contact me via our website, EMPTaskForce.us, or our YouTube channel, which is called Task Force on National Homeland Security, both managed by two super professionals Don Davidson and Deb Fortson. And we just published our first series of books since Peter Pry's passing, with more to come. And as you're aware, George, and you've mentioned this just tonight, Peter was a prolific author.
He was. Hold on right there, Glenn. We'll come back and get the titles of these new books and talk more about protecting the grid. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with you with Glenn Rhodes. The website is linked up at coasttocoastam.com. And Glenn, before we go into some more great questions for you, tell us some of these titles of these publications that just came out.
Sure, George. Again, they'll find them on the EMP Task Force. And obviously our prime directive is to educate and advocate for grid resiliency. And we're striving to be one of the leading go-to resources for any of all these threats. But every once in a while, we step over the line and we explore what's called right of boom, black swan events. And just yesterday, we posted an excellent task force free downloadable called Grid Down, Death of a Nation, the psychology and physiology of human desperation, starvation, and living without the rule of law through a prolonged grid-down scenario. This should really be a requirement for all Americans, and especially policymakers and or emergency managers. It was written by our Deputy National Director, Jonathan Hollerman, who brings his expert knowledge as a former survival, evasion, resistance, and escape SERI military trainer. And then there's two other books that you can get from Hollerman called Survival 1 and Survival 2. They can be purchased from links found on our website. And then another book that we just published called Catastrophe Now, which is a compilation of works by task force experts, including our executive director, Cynthia Ayers, who takes the lead as the senior writer and editor of that book publication. And then we continue also to publish reports and papers directed specifically to the U.S. Congress and Department of Energy on specific topics, like two partially classified reports that were compiled on that. Remember, I was talking about that Metcalf attack. Mm-hmm. So there was a classified report, and there's also an unclassified report called the 2013 Metcalf Power Station Physical Attack that was written by our guys, and also the first 2011 polar vortex incident that was written by two of our guys. And amazingly, there's a second one that was not done by us, but it's a 2021 that highlighted suggestions that were not realized in the first 2011 report to the Electrical Reliability Council of Texas, ERCOT. These excellent reports were compiled by our Eastern Regional Director, Leonard Januzik, and David Hilt, who's our Illinois State Director, and he's a former North American Electrical Reliability Corporation Vice President. And then finally, the Chinese balloon report, which people can reach out to me, and I'll give them a condensed version by our Alabama State Director, Greg Allison. And that's in the hands of Mark Green, the committee chair for the Department of Homeland Security, and Senator Ron Johnson, who are very concerned with our work and want to promote us and help us in every way we can for pushing forward, the message. And then I also want to explain that any one of our members, George, is always available to be interviewed by you or others simply by request. For example, our National Operations Deputy Director under me is David Pine, who gives an excellent military strategic analysis on national threats and strategic posturing. And I was attracted to David Pine right off the bat when I heard about him, because when I talked to David, it was like I was talking to Peter Pry, which is really amazing.
That
really
is
impressive.
Amazing.
Yeah, and David Pine is of that caliber. He's more, I'm kind of the boots on the ground type guy, but David Pine has got an excellent sense, and he's like a chip off the old block from Peter. So he's really a good guy. Then of course we have initiatives like Dale Raleigh, an emergency manager of Waldo County, New Hampshire, who gets it, and he's done some amazing things in that county. And then we also continue to partner, of course, and promote films like David Womack's Black Sky event, which you've had on your program before.
Yeah.
And also film producer David Tice with actor Dennis Quaid's Grid Down and Power Up, which can be viewed at any time online under that same name. So if they go to griddownpowerup.com, they can see the whole movie, and it's really an excellent expose and introduction to what we're facing.
What are you more concerned about, Glenn? The EMP attack or a solar flare from the sun?
Well, I would say a grid down situation from an EMP man-made attack is what I'm most concerned about, and we'll talk about that a little bit in a minute. But yeah, but that's just for our nation. The sun, it's so unpredictable. It's hard to kind of wrap your arms around what's going to happen there.
Yeah.
But anyway, we're trying to make a difference, but. I can tell you that, George, proceeding on, I can tell you that the news overall is not good. and here's why. We continue to have a massive unaddressed resiliency issue. Further, our work on trying to secure safe and reliable resilient energy has to be economically and environmentally sustainable, right? So we have added to that challenge. We have a complex mixture of laws, political, agendas and regulations demanding that certain technologies be added to our new homes, for example, for charging EVs, without fully understanding the impact of these decisions on greater communities or regions. For example, George, who would have considered that solar panels placed over prime agricultural land that, if damaged by hail or wind, could allow dangerous and toxic chemicals that are made in these solar panels to leach into the groundwater?
Nobody would have anticipated that. Nobody.
No. When I first heard about it from a physicist, I go, you got to be kidding. We're talking about gallium arsenide and some other toxic chemicals. And so, my advice is that, if you could put them over the desert, maybe, but when you put them over prime agricultural land, you could potentially create huge and future EPA Superfund sites. So it's complex, and then when you talk about the expenses to replace these monstrous giant windmill farms when they're out of date and they go out of phase. I mean, those are things that it's part of the maintenance part of any technology that you do. And I remember when I was in architecture school, everybody really appreciated, of course, the famous architect, was it Wright?
Lloyd Wright, Andrew Lloyd Wright?
Yes. And amazingly enough, his designs and his buildings were incredible and beautiful, but some of them couldn't even be made because they were so outside the range of norm. But the amazing thing is that, he had a problem and a challenge with doing the practical aspects of the designs. Like, he didn't put enough storage places. If you go into one of Frank Lloyd Wright's houses, there's absolutely no storage anywhere. It's got a beautiful design and layout, but as far as that and the practicality of maintenance and everything, and I think that's kind of where we're at. We're kind of beginning to understand, like a child learning to walk, that there's something missing from the present energy solutions that we've created. What about you, George? Do you think there's something missing? I mean, we're spending billions of dollars on this stuff, and do we really understand, George, what we're doing?
No, unfortunately. I mean, this is a priority that I grasped when Bill Forstchen wrote his book, One Second After.
Right.
And I have not let it go, and I'm not going to let it go, Glenn. I'm going to keep battling away until we get a politician to provide legislation to get this done. Yeah,
and it's incredible that we have an inability to formulate solid cost-benefit analyses on these pet solutions. It's not a matter of, wow, is this thing going to be good for the environment long-term? Or is it a matter of, George, you just gave me a lot of, political money for my campaign fund, and I'm going to do you a favor? I mean, I don't know. I don't know what the answers are, but I know the challenges of keeping the bulk legacy power grid purring and balanced with a proper frequencies and voltages without interruption it has to be maintained in order to go into the next phase of what we're going to do. I mean, I think, fortunately for humanity, we are on the verge of now retrieving and understanding information like we've never seen before, with the advent of obviously quantum computing that's had some breakthroughs in the last 4 months, coupled with artificial intelligence. And hopefully this will allow us to understand these complex systems and threats like never before, and maybe define what needs to be done. I know my good friend Chuck Manto, who is right up there with Peter Pry and Representative Roscoe Bartlett, who started an organization called the EMP Special Interest Group, which is now called the National Disaster Resiliency Council, has always shouted to me that, Glenn, we need to start small. We need to start working on local solutions. In other words, start by securing generation, transmission, and distribution for a small community. And that kind of leads me with what I was thinking about doing. And of course, that's up to you. But I wanted to give you a little story about what happened when I met Ambassador James Woolsey, who's obviously former director of the CIA. We met at a D.C. energy conference, security conference, and he told me, he said, Glenn, you live in Colorado, right? And I said, yes, sir, I do. And I said, do you know that I met some guy out of Montrose, Colorado? His name is Doug Teeswetter. He said, he told me about a unique technology that seemed different. And he said, could you check it out for me? And I said, sir, I will be glad to. So I packed up my bags with a close friend, former chief avionics engineer and brilliant guy, one of the most brilliant guys I know. He was the Lockheed Martin's chief avionics engineer for the Orion spacecraft. His name was Dwight Eckert. And we investigated the system. And I asked Dwight after we came back from Montrose on the way back to Denver, I said, Dwight, what do you think? He said, Glenn, with just a little bit of minor tweaking, this could be an important slice of the energy resilience pie. And so I don't know if Doug Teeswetter's on the line, but
no,
we wanted to. Yeah, he's not going to be. Okay, that's fine. So anyway, we came to the conclusion that with his technology and some other ones like it, we could potentially have some good news, right, for everything that we're doing.
Yeah, he's the next generation of solar technology, isn't he?
Yeah, he really is, and it's kind of a man-made geothermal reactor. So when we talk about, he uses a very, very high-grade chip that's used on spacecraft, but the way he has integrated it, he learned it from working in some projects when he was in his younger days in North Africa. He was able to create man-made geothermal, and it's using a very environmentally friendly glycol-type solution that keeps energy on the ground like a heat battery for a long period of time. And then I also want to tell you that there has been some significant developments in the spring of this year, and without going into too much detail, I want to tell you that they revolve around breakthroughs in nuclear technologies. And the Department of Energy, the Department of Homeland Security, and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission are all aware of these developments. In my humble opinion, I think we need to move heaven and earth to refine these technologies and maybe add some finishing touches to cut through the red tape needed to manufacture and deploy them ASAP. And according to the people that I've been talking to in the intelligence community, they figure that we probably need to do a first deployment of about 30,000 of these units in strategic locations around the country. I call them the A-10 warthogs of small modular nuclear reactors. But they must have an all-hazards protection integrated into what's being manufactured. And Dr. Pry has always talked to me about and told the nation to hammer, and he hammered in my head to start using the term what he called SANE. And I don't know if you remember if he ever said that or talked to you about it, but SANE stands for Strategic Assured National Existence. And so these breakthroughs that were born through a long history of reactor research dating back to Admiral Hyman Rickover's nuclear navy,
yeah.
They offer some of the most promising things in the future, and they're not really fuel cells, and they're not really nuclear batteries in the classic sense, but they are some breakthroughs that I think at the appropriate time, I think Coast to Coast should have the CEO and maybe a couple of these engineers that came out of the nuclear Navy tell you about what is important and how these things are so safe and resilient that it could be a real game changer. But if we don't do that, it's like building and running a massive V8 engine with 2 or 3 of the cylinders not firing. I mean, think about it. I think tonight would be a good chance to invite everybody, like the 2 industry leaders, Terra Nova, which is, I think, one of the 2 or Bill Gates' projects, Terra Nova or New Scale Energy Systems, to add a healthy dose of all hazards protection to their equations. Because if not, a good analogy would be like, I just gave you a super heart that could survive all hazards, but you need to make sure that everything that comes out of that heart goes into resilient structures. And so let me emphasize right now that the most of the billion-dollar companies that are deploying these things, to my knowledge, they're absolutely not factoring in true resilience. And if anybody is related to those 2 companies or any other companies, I want them to contact me, and I can connect the dots. We can connect them to some people.
All right, hold on, Glenn. We're at the top of the hour, but we shall be back with more in a moment on Coast to Coast AM.